If walls could talk, Rikers Island would scream. Before we dive into this true story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and buckle up because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's the story New York tried to bury, a story that turned razor blades and soap bars into silent weapons. August 2014. The lights in the solitary unit flickered, shadows stretching across the cold concrete like ghosts. Guards moved quietly, pretending not to notice the fight happening 3 cells down. Inside, a man named Luis Ghost Rivera pressed his back against the wall, bleeding from his cheek. His attacker, another inmate from the Bloodhound Brims, a notorious Rikers crew, whispered through the bars, "Next time, you won't wake up." But this wasn't about a personal beef. It was part of something bigger, a secret war inside the jail that no one outside the island knew existed. A war fought with toothbrush shanks, coded hand signs, and alliances that shifted overnight. A war where correction officers sometimes picked a side and other times looked the other way. That night, Luis knew something had changed. He had smuggled information, a note exposing how guards were helping certain gangs control entire cell blocks. Word got out. Now, there was a price on his head. As the morning came, rumors spread like wildfire. A gang called the Trinitarios was preparing to retaliate. Their leader had been slashed in the showers the night before, a setup believed to be ordered by someone close to Luis. By breakfast, tension filled the air thicker than smoke. Inmates refused to sit near rivals. Even the COs whispered among themselves. Then, out of nowhere, a scream cut through the silence. A fight had erupted in Dorm C-74, the adolescent unit. One of the youngest inmates was found collapsed, a razor blade hidden inside a bar of soap beside him. That's when it hit everyone. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone was sending a message that no one was safe, not even the kids. Luis knew his time was running out. He had 2 choices: snitch and vanish into protective custody, or fight and take his chances in the yard. But there was one problem. The very officer who promised him protection was the same man passing his name to the gangs. And before the next lockdown, Luis Rivera disappeared from his cell. No transfer order, no trace, nothing. Now here's where the real story begins. How one man's disappearance exposed a dark network of corruption, cover-ups, and a silent rule that runs Rikers Island: survive or disappear. Before the blood, before the whispers, and long before his name started echoing through Rikers' grimy corridors, Luis Rivera was just another young man from the South Bronx, trying to survive the chaos outside. He grew up where the sound of sirens was the city's lullaby, and dreams faded as fast as they formed. His mother worked double shifts cleaning offices downtown, while his older brother, Hector, got pulled into the streets, small-time hustling, corner deals, and later, gang life. Luis promised himself he'd never go that route. But Rikers doesn't care about promises. In 2013, a drug bust gone wrong changed everything. Luis had been at the wrong place, a Bronx bodega, when police raided it. The bag of pills wasn't his, but the officer's word was final. Within months, he was remanded to Rikers Island to await trial, a place that chewed up men and spit out shadows. From the ferry ride across the East River, he could already feel it, that strange mix of fear and silence that clung to everyone heading to the island. The city skyline shrank behind him while the island grew closer, surrounded by fences, razor wire, and the smell of something metallic in the air. His first night inside was a lesson. The dorm lights never really went off. The air was thick with sweat, bleach, and cigarette smoke from contraband smuggled in through guard pockets. An inmate named Tyrell Smoke Jenkins, a self-proclaimed OG of the Bloodhound Brims, cornered him that night. "You from the Bronx?" Smoke asked, his tone low but firm. Luis nodded. "Yeah." "Then you're with us," Smoke said. "Ain't no neutral zones in here. That was Rikers' law. You don't choose sides. Sides choose you." Days turned into weeks, and Luis learned fast. If you wanted to eat, you joined a table. If you wanted to sleep, you paid someone for peace. And if you wanted to survive, you kept your head down. But Luis was different. He didn't want power, but he had something more dangerous: information. He worked as a porter, mopping hallways outside the staff offices. That's where he first overheard a conversation that changed his life. Two correction officers were arguing about the list, a roster of inmates being rotated through different dorms, allegedly controlled by a gang-affiliated officer known as C.O. Malone. It wasn't supposed to be heard, but Luis caught enough. The list was being used to move enemies closer together, setting up fights that looked random but were actually orchestrated hits. At first, he kept it quiet, but when his friend, a young inmate named Marcus Bell, only 18, got moved to a dorm run by a rival gang and ended up in the infirmary with his face slashed, Luis started connecting the dots. Someone was playing God inside those walls. Then came the day that changed everything. Luis found a small bar of soap sitting on his bed. It looked normal until he picked it up, heavy, oddly shaped. Inside, buried under the thin layer of soap, was a razor blade. No note, no warning, just a silent threat. That was the moment Luis realized he wasn't just another inmate. Someone knew what he had overheard. Someone wanted to shut him up. So he did what no one dared to do. He wrote it down. Names, dates, notes about which COs were moving inmates where. He hid the paper inside a ventilation shaft behind his bunk, waiting for a chance to get it out. But in Rikers, secrets don't stay secret for long. Within days, people started watching him differently, whispering, testing his moves. Even the guards treated him colder. And that's when C.O. Malone called him out during evening count. "Rivera, step out." Luis froze. The air went heavy. He stepped into the corridor, heart pounding. Malone leaned close, his voice a low growl. "You been writing things down, Ghost? You think people don't notice when a mouse tries to play detective?" The nickname stuck, Ghost. Not because he was silent, but because after that night, people said he was marked. Malone smiled and walked away. "Careful what you hear in here, Rivera. The walls remember." That night, Luis lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long before the game swallowed him whole. He didn't know it yet, but what he had discovered, and the way he tried to expose it, would soon spark one of the most violent internal crackdowns Rikers had seen in years. The secret war wasn't coming. It had already begun. By the fall of 2014, the tension inside Rikers wasn't just felt, it was breathing. You could hear it in the shuffle of boots during count time, in the way inmates spoke less and watched more, and the strange quiet that came right before a fight broke out. Every corner had eyes. Every cell had an allegiance. And Luis Ghost Rivera, once just another inmate waiting for trial, had become an unwanted name whispered by both prisoners and guards. His notes had grown longer, now filled with details he planned to send to a legal aid worker he trusted, someone who had visited him months earlier and told him, "If you ever feel unsafe, write everything down. Don't let it disappear with you." But inside Rikers, nothing stayed hidden. One cold morning, as inmates lined up for chow, the energy shifted. The Brims and the Trinitarios, two crews who'd kept an uneasy truce for months, were suddenly on opposite sides of the cafeteria. No one knew why, but everyone felt it coming. Then it happened. A tray clattered to the floor. Someone shouted. In seconds, the room exploded into chaos. Fists, trays, metal chairs crashing, screams echoing off concrete walls. Luis ducked behind a pillar as officers stormed in swinging batons, trying to break it up. But amidst the chaos, he saw it. A flash of silver glinting in the fluorescent light. A razor blade. An inmate went down, clutching his neck. Blood sprayed across the wall like paint. Inmates backed away. Silence fell. The guards froze. Because the man bleeding out wasn't an inmate. It was C.O. Malone, the same officer who had threatened Luis weeks earlier. Within hours, the jail was on full lockdown. The rumors spread fast. Someone had targeted a correction officer, and the higher-ups wanted revenge. Every dorm was searched, every inmate interrogated. They stripped the cells bare, mattresses flipped, vents torn open, letters confiscated. And that's when Luis realized his mistake. The notebook he'd hidden, the one filled with names and details, was gone. That night, a different kind of fear settled in. Not the fear of gangs or violence, but the fear of being erased. At Rikers, paperwork could vanish, footage could be lost, and witnesses could disappear into solitary cells with no release date. Days passed without word. Luis was moved from his dorm to an isolated tier. No explanation, no record. It was supposed to be protective custody, but it felt like a cage within a cage. That's where he met Officer Harper, a veteran CO who'd worked Rikers for nearly 20 years. Harper was different, quiet, watchful. One night during rounds, he stopped by Luis's cell and said quietly, "We didn't stab Malone, did you?" Luis shook his head. "I didn't touch him. He was dirty, but I didn't." Harper interrupted. "I know. Malone wasn't clean, but they need someone to blame." For the first time, Luis saw it clearly, the real hierarchy of Rikers. It wasn't gangs running the show. It was a silent network of corrupt officers, moving pieces like a chessboard, using inmates as pawns, erasing whoever saw too much. Weeks later, a memo circulated among staff, an investigation into officer misconduct linked to Malone's unit. But inside the jail, no one believed investigations mattered. Harper whispered to Luis one night, "They're going to pin this on you, Ghost. You know too much, and if you talk, you'll vanish." Luis tried to get word out, writing a letter to his lawyer through the inmate mail system. But 2 days later, the letter came back unopened, stamped, "Return to sender, inmate transferred." Transferred? He hadn't gone anywhere. That's when he knew someone on the inside had already started erasing him. His identity in the system was being rewritten, cell records changed, visitations canceled. He was becoming a ghost for real. Meanwhile, the violence only grew worse. Reports of inmate slashings tripled in a month. Inmates whispered that a new rule had been passed around the blocks. No one talks. No one snitches. Survive or disappear. Luis started writing again. This time not names, but a confession. A message meant for anyone who might find it if he didn't make it out. He hid it deep behind a cracked tile near his toilet, sealing it with soap. That was his last act of defiance. Because 2 nights later, officers came to his cell at 3:14 a.m. "Pack your things, Rivera," one said. "You're moving." Luis didn't argue. He gathered what little he had and followed. The hall was silent. Too silent. As they turned the corner near the service corridor, he noticed they weren't heading toward intake. They were going deeper, down into the old segregation wing, the one they said was closed for repairs. The lights flickered. The door shut behind him with a heavy clang. That was the last time anyone saw Luis Ghost Rivera alive. Or at least, that's what the official reports say. When word first spread that Luis Ghost Rivera had been transferred, no one believed it. Not the inmates who'd watched him walk the tier hours before. Not the porters who cleaned his cell and saw his toothbrush still wet. And not Officer Harper, the man who'd quietly warned him days earlier. Inside Rikers, transfers happen with paperwork, not silence. But Rivera's name vanished overnight. Gone from the system, his inmate number reassigned. To the Department of Corrections, it was as if he'd never existed. Still, whispers have their own way of traveling through concrete. Inmates in C-74, the adolescent unit, claimed they saw officers escorting Rivera through the maintenance tunnels, an area supposedly shut down since the 90s. Another inmate swore he heard a struggle, then saw 2 guards carrying a duffel bag toward the loading dock. No reports, no body, no proof. Just silence. But Harper couldn't let it go. For years, he'd watched Rikers rot from the inside. The gangs, the payoffs, the unreported beatings swept under the rug. Yet this was different. An inmate erased like a ghost. Harper started asking quiet questions, the kind that drew attention. Did you see Rivera's transfer slip? Who authorized the move? Why wasn't he logged in the new facility? Each time, the answers came back colder. Mind your business, Harper. Then came the first accident. Harper's locker was broken into. His car tires slashed in the staff parking lot. A note left under his windshield wiper. Stop digging, or you'll join the ghosts. He should have stopped. But conscience can be louder than fear. Meanwhile, on the outside, a journalist named Tanya Reid from the New York Ledger was chasing her own lead. She'd been reporting on conditions at Rikers for months. Brutality, corruption, the rising deaths in custody. But one day, she received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a single page. Rivera's handwriting. Smudged, shaky, but legible. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Don't believe what they tell you. Look for the soap. The soap tells the truth. Tanya stared at the words for hours. The soap tells the truth. It didn't make sense, not at first. But she knew enough about prison slang to suspect it wasn't random. So she reached out to an old contact, a former inmate who'd done time in Rikers' C-76 unit. He told her something that made her blood run cold. In Rikers, if someone hides a blade inside a bar of soap, it's a warning. But if they hide paper, it's evidence. That meant somewhere inside, Luis had left something behind, proof of what he'd seen. Back on the island, Harper was searching too. During a late-night shift, he snuck into Rivera's old cell. He pried at the loose tile near the toilet, the same spot Rivera had stared at night after night. Behind it, he found it, a small piece of damp paper wrapped in plastic and sealed with soap residue. The handwriting was faint but clear enough to read. Malone, Harper, Jenkins, control list, D-block rotations, soap code. Harper's heart pounded. His name was on that list, not as an accomplice, but as a witness. Rivera had written everything he knew. That was the moment Harper realized. This wasn't just a gang war. It was a system built on silence. Officers were trading favors, manipulating transfers, and staging fights to keep inmates divided and the truth buried. 2 nights later, Harper slipped the paper into an envelope and mailed it anonymously to the New York Ledger. But he never knew it reached Tanya, because the next day, internal affairs came for him. Officer Harper, one of them said, "You're being placed on leave pending an investigation." No explanation, no charges, just a suspension and a warning not to contact anyone. That same week, Tanya published her first article, Ghost in Rikers, the inmate who vanished without a trace. It exploded. News outlets picked it up. Protesters gathered outside the Department of Correction headquarters. For the first time, the public was asking questions. Who was Luis Rivera? How did he disappear? And what were guards hiding? The DOC responded fast. A press release read, "There is no record of an inmate named Luis Rivera fitting that description in our system." That was the twist. They'd erased his digital identity entirely. Even the court docket was missing his name. But the inmates knew, and they started talking. Letters began leaking from the inside. Anonymous statements. Drawings of cells marked with red excess. One note simply said, "The soap bars weren't just for blades. They were for messages." That line confirmed everything Tanya suspected. There was an underground communication system in Rikers, run by inmates who couldn't speak openly. They carved soap bars, hid papers, and passed them during cleaning shifts. Every bar told a story. Who was beaten, who was transferred, who vanished. And Luis Rivera? He was the first to document it. By winter, the federal monitor overseeing Rikers called for an emergency review. Internal files were subpoenaed. COs were questioned. But Harper had already disappeared. His apartment was found empty, badge left on the table, refrigerator humming quietly. No signs of struggle, just one bar of soap left on the counter, cracked open, hollow, and empty. Tanya stared at the photo from the scene when it leaked. She whispered to herself, "He found something bigger, and they found him first." The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. The secret war wasn't between gangs anymore. It was between truth and silence. And in Rikers Island, silence always won. Winter hit New York hard that year. Ice crusted the bridges, wind howled through the East River, and Rikers Island stood in the middle of it all, frozen, gray, and silent. From the outside, it looked like a prison built to hold chaos. But the truth Tanya Reid was chasing suggested something else. Rikers wasn't just a facility. It was an ecosystem of secrets, protected by those who profited from keeping it broken. After her story, Ghost in Rikers, the inmate who vanished without a trace, went viral, Tanya's inbox exploded. Former officers, ex-inmates, and even lawyers reached out, each with fragments of a bigger puzzle. One email stood out. It came from a burner address, insideunit@protonmail.com. The message was short. "You were right about the soap. There's more, but you'll need protection before you publish it." Attached was a single photo, a crumpled log sheet showing inmate transfers between cell blocks. The same day Luis Ghost Rivera vanished, 6 other inmates had been moved under temporary reassignment. None of their names appeared in later records. 6 ghosts. Tanya knew she couldn't investigate this alone. She met with her editor at the Ledger, an old-school journalist named Frank Doyle. He warned her, "You're digging into something the city's been covering for decades. People have tried. They don't all walk away clean." But Tanya wasn't backing down. "If the city's erasing people," she said, "then we have to be the ones who write them back into history." Her next step was risky. She arranged a meeting with a former Rikers nurse, Elena Ortiz, who had worked in the C-76 unit during the same year Luis disappeared. They met in a dim diner in Queens, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and old secrets. Elena looked nervous, eyes darting toward the door every few minutes. "You don't know what that place really is," she whispered. "You think gangs run Rikers?" "No, the officers do. They use the gangs to control the blocks. And anyone who talks too much," she paused, voice trembling, "they get sent to the old wing. That's where Rivera went. That's where they make people disappear." Tanya leaned forward. "You mean solitary?" Elena shook her head. "No, deeper. There's a part of the old facility that's not even on the current map. They called it South Annex. It was supposed to be closed after a fire years ago, but it's still being used. No cameras, no logs. That name, South Annex, would become Tanya's obsession. She spent weeks digging through public records, archived maps, construction blueprints, anything that could prove it existed. Buried in a 1997 safety report, she found it, a footnote mentioning South Annex, structurally unsound, recommended for demolition. But there was no follow-up, no record of it ever being demolished. Then came another email. This time, no name, just an audio file. Tanya pressed play. Static. Then a faint voice, trembling. "This is Officer Harper. If you're hearing this, I don't have much time. They know I found the list. Rivera wasn't transferred. He was taken downstairs. South Annex. There's a ledger down there. Every name they erased is written in it. They call it the Book of the Ghosts." Tanya froze. Harper was alive, or at least he had been when the recording was made. She spent the next 48 hours tracking where the audio had come from. The metadata pointed to a public library computer near Queensbridge. When she checked the timestamp, it was from 2 hours before Harper went missing. That was her confirmation. He tried to get the truth out before they silenced him. Determined to find the Book of the Ghosts, Tanya filed a Freedom of Information request with the Department of Correction. Days turned to weeks, no response. Then, one evening, she came home to find her apartment door slightly open. Her laptop was still there, but her recorder and printed notes were gone. On her kitchen counter sat a single object, a bar of soap cracked down the middle. Inside was a folded strip of paper. For words, written in rushed handwriting. "Stop before they stop you." She didn't sleep that night. She just sat by the window, watching headlights flash across the wet street, replaying Harper's words in her mind. But Tanya knew this was bigger than threats. It was about truth, and truth has a way of demanding to be seen. She reached out to Senator Raymond Holt, a reform advocate who had been pushing for Rikers closure. She showed him the photos, the log sheets, the letters, even the soap with the message inside. Holt was silent for a long time, then finally said, "If even half of this is real, you're about to uncover something the city's been hiding for decades." Together, they arranged a private visit to Rikers under the guise of a press review of facility reform progress. But Tanya wasn't there for policy photos. She was there to find the truth, or at least the door to South Annex. The day she stepped onto the island, the air felt heavier. She'd read about Rikers for years, but nothing prepared her for the feeling of being watched by hundreds of eyes, guards, inmates, cameras, and something colder. Halfway through the tour, she saw it. A rusted steel door seal with chains and warning tape. A faint stencil on the metal read, "S. Annex/authorized personnel only." Tanya's heart thudded. She asked the warden, "What's down there?" "Old maintenance," he replied quickly. "Closed off after the fire." But she saw the padlock was new, the chains clean. Someone was still using it. As they walked away, a sound echoed faintly from behind the door. 3 knocks, then silence. Later that night, Tanya couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was trying to reach her. The same pattern of knocks replayed in her head over and over. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. A code. She went back through the audio recording Harper sent. Near the end, barely audible under his final words, she heard it, the same 3 knocks. Harper had been signaling her before they took him. And now, standing on the edge of a truth too dangerous to speak, Tanya realized one chilling thing. Rikers didn't just bury its dead. It kept them. And somewhere behind that sealed door, the Book of the Ghosts was waiting to be found. The morning Tanya Reed returned to Rikers Island, the sky over the East River was gray and heavy, the kind of gray that pressed down like the weight of a secret too long held. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her official request to revisit the facility had been denied. But she learned one thing from months of digging into the ghost case. No truth ever surfaces through permission. She came armed with only a flashlight, her press ID, and a small body camera hidden in her jacket. An officer she trusted, one she'd met quietly during her first visit, had agreed to look the other way for 30 minutes. After that, she was on her own. The hallway to South Annex smelled of dust and rust. The closer she got, the quieter everything became. The hum of fluorescent lights faded until she could only hear her own heartbeat. The metal door stood in front of her again, the same rusted gate with the warning tape, now half torn. She tugged the chain. It was loose this time. Someone had already been here. She pulled it open. The air that escaped was cold, stale, and damp. A breath from the island's forgotten lungs. Her flashlight flickered over peeling paint, broken pipes, and faded graffiti. On the far wall, someone had scratched a message. "We were here." The corridor sloped downward. Tanya's footsteps echoed softly as she passed empty cells, each one stripped bare except for stains on the concrete and numbers etched into the walls. Some were scratched out, others circled. At the end of the hall stood an office door, crooked, splintered, but still locked. She pressed her ear against it. Nothing. Then she noticed the hinges were rusted through. With one push, the door gave way. Inside was a small desk buried under dust, yellowed papers scattered across the floor. Her light caught a metal cabinet in the corner. Its label was faint, but the letters were still visible. Transfer records, 2012 to 2016. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Folders upon folders, many empty. But halfway down, she found one marked with a single name, Rivera L. She flipped it open and froze. It wasn't a transfer sheet. It was an incident report, and signed, undated, with 2 lines written in blue ink. Subject relocated, South Annex. Status, terminated, non-recorded. Her chest tightened. She turned the page and saw a photo stapled to the back. Luis Rivera, younger than she expected, eyes sharp and tired. The corner of the photo had a small fingerprint in soap residue. That's when she saw it. A sealed notebook inside a plastic bag beneath the folder. On the cover, written in fading marker, were 3 words. The Book of Ghosts. Her breath caught. This was it, the ledger Harper spoke of. Inside were dozens of names. Inmates, officers, even staff psychologists. Each name had a date and a note. Moved, reassigned, disappeared, terminated. Some were crossed out. Others ended with a chilling tag, South Annex. Luis had been documenting everything, and he hadn't been the only one. Several handwriting styles filled the pages. Others had added their own notes, even after his death. It was a record of everyone the system had erased. As she turned the pages, her flashlight flickered again. The battery warning blinked red. In that dim light, she noticed something scribbled across the back cover. Faint but readable. "If they find this, the truth lives here now." That was Luis's handwriting. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy, close. Tanya froze. Someone was coming. She shut off her flashlight, clutching the notebook against her chest. The footsteps stopped near the doorway. A beam of light swept across the room. A voice called out, low male, firm, "Ms. Reed, you shouldn't be here." She recognized the voice. Warden Cole, the same official who denied her entry. "I came for the truth," Tanya said quietly. He stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating her face. "You think you're the first to try?" Rikers has its own rules. The dead stay buried. Tanya's voice didn't shake. Not anymore. Before he could move, she hit the record button on her body camera. You said that on tape, she whispered. That's all I needed. The warden's eyes went cold. But before he could react, a second flashlight beam appeared behind him. It was the officer who'd let her in. That's enough, he said sharply. She's leaving, and so am I. The warden hesitated, then turned and walked away, his boots echoing through the hall. Tanya didn't waste a second. She ran. Up the corridor, past the graffiti, through the gate, out into the freezing air where the sun was just beginning to rise over the water. Hours later, back in her office, she uploaded everything. The video, the documents, the photographs of the Book of Ghosts. Her editor watched in silence. When the final frame faded out, he whispered, "This will burn the city down." That night, the Ledger published the story. The Book of Ghosts, how Rikers Island hid a secret network of disappearances. It went viral within hours. News outlets picked it up. Families of missing inmates came forward. Federal investigators reopened dormant cases. And among the chaos, one quiet victory. A court order to permanently close Rikers Island by the end of the decade. But for Tanya, the real moment came later, when she visited the Bronx, standing in front of a mural someone had painted on a crumbling wall. It showed the face of a man with tired eyes and the words, "Ghost Lives." She smiled faintly, tears catching in the wind. Because Luis Ghost Rivera may have disappeared from Rikers, but his truth had finally escaped the island that tried to bury it. And now, his story belonged to everyone. If you made it this far, you just heard the story Rikers Island never wanted the world to know. Luis Ghost Rivera's name may have been erased from the records, but his truth lives on. A reminder that silence is the loudest weapon behind prison walls. Don't let this story fade. Share this video, hit the like button, and subscribe for more true stories that reveal what really happens in the darkest corners of the system. Because as long as people like you keep watching, listening, and speaking up, the ghosts of Rikers will never be forgotten.